Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for attending. My name is Karen, I'm one of the facilitators at Circles. I'm a social worker and I've been working in various settings over the last 18 years. With me today is Lara Noik, a fellow Circles facilitator who'll be presenting to us on how to navigate your first year after a loss. Lara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Karen. Yes, I'm Lara. I am a social worker. I am, as you can hear, from South Africa. I have a special interest in the fields of mental health, of relationships, and of resilience. And I'm also a Circles facilitator, and I have a very special place in my heart for group work. I think that the power of group work is just immeasurable, and really to have a circle of people around you who are there without judgment, to support, to care is just invaluable. And, you know, the three sentences I always say is this is a space where somebody can really, truly say to you, I get you, I've been there, you've got this. So I'm really privileged to be here this evening to present tonight. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. So for those who don't know Circles, Circles is a leading platform for emotional support that ensures no one has to overcome life's challenges alone. It's built on the core principle that in order to overcome life's challenges, you need to be heard and supported by the people who actually understand what you're going through. So our platform matches people who are going through the same challenges in their lives, such as the loss of a loved one, which we'll be talking about tonight. Each circle is led by a mental health professional, like myself and Lara, and together they have a safe space to chat, meet weekly via video, and that way we support each other through the healing process. Everybody who has attended this event tonight will be getting a special offer from Circles. So the offer will be 30% off to a circle, and most importantly, actionable tips that will help you feel better starting today. But before we officially get started, I just want to mention a few logistical things. This is a webinar, meaning there is a one-way audio and video. So you can hear us, but we can't see you or hear you. So that being said, we really do want to hear from you. So we will be answering all your questions. And if you have any questions for us, please submit them through the box on your screen. And I think that that's all the logistics that we need to go through. So I think now let's get started.
Okay, I'm just going to share the screen here and hopefully you can all see the slideshow there. Okay, so yes, thank you, Karen. As Karen said, tonight we're going to be talking about navigating the first year after a loss. And before I start, I just wanted to say that I got the information in this presentation from many different sources, from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I'm going to mention later on, from David Kessler, who is a grief therapist and expert in grief, who is just absolutely incredible, and I just absolutely love his work. And lastly, but certainly not least, from our group members, from people who have really been going through this themselves, who really, you know, I unabashedly ask them for tips and ideas of, you know, what they've been through and what they would like to share with someone else who's going through this, you know, how to navigate this first year. Okay, so I'd like to call this first slide the terrain, because that really is what I'm going to be offering here. Just a landscape, just an idea of what things could look like, not an idea of what they definitely will look like, because we know that every grief experience is completely unique. So what we're going to be looking at in the next hour or so, or maybe a little bit under that, is the idea of the first year, what that means. We're going to look at what to expect and to understand that we are holistic beings. So what do we expect on an emotional level? What we expect physically, cognitively, and spiritually. We are going to put more emphasis on the emotional level because there's just so much there, and so much of the journey looks there, but we don't want to forget the other parts of ourselves. And then hopefully we'll have time to look a little bit at the end at the road towards healing. Okay. So yeah, the first year, is this the worst? And I think the answer, as probably everyone who knows me will know, is yes and no. So yes, there's parts of this first year that is just, the world you knew is taken away from you. The floor is taken from under you. We speak about loss. It's the loss outside of you of somebody that's loved, but it's also that loss of something inside of you, something really deep inside of you. And that world you knew is just a completely different place. And it's this raw pain, this disbelief, the agony of reality, and there's very, very deep emotions. There's also all these new firsts to face. The first time you make a meal on your own, the first anniversary, the first birthday, the first holiday season, all these firsts to get through on your own, which we're also going to talk about a little bit more later. But I think also, on the other hand, to say that, yes, this is a really painful year, but there's no timeline when it comes to grief. There's no rights, there's no wrongs. People a few years down the line will still be feeling some of these feelings as well. So we don't look at timelines, but we're going to navigate a little bit about what to expect in this first part. Okay. So let's start with the emotional journey. And what I really wanted to look at is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages. And I think that sometimes they get a lot of criticism. And I think that comes from a little bit of a misunderstanding. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss-American psychiatrist, and she wrote a book called On Death and Dying, and it was really about her experience with people who were terminally ill. And this was then generalized and looked at in terms of people who have experienced their loss. And she spoke about 5 stages. Now, where the criticism comes in is some people think that these are 5 stages that you go through in a linear way. So you do this, you get to the 5th stage, and then you're over. And that is not her intention at all. And we're going to look at that. This is just, as I say, a framework for us to understand some of the things we might be experiencing through our grief journey. It is certainly not linear, and it's not meant to be taken in that way. And not everyone goes through all of them. So some people might go through one or not another, and certainly not in a prescribed order. Okay, so let's look at what they are. Okay, so denial. Okay, denial itself has got quite a bad reputation. People like to go, oh gosh, she's not dealing with this. She's in such denial, right? And actually, when we look deeper at what denial is, there's actually a psychological intelligence to denial, right? So what does denial look like? That's when people will say, they'll carry on as if nothing's happened, or they'll say, I'm fine, it's fine, etc. What is really going on is that when we lose somebody, it's too much to process all at once. It's just too big. Denial allows us to slow it down, right? And to take little pieces when we're ready, right? When we're ready. So what I say to people is it's a really, really great short-term strategy. In terms of long-term, I'm not quite sure. Then we look at some of the other things we need to deal with. But it really helps us to get through just that, that first raw pain. It helps us to survive in the beginning. It gives us what we say here, a protective start. And then once it ends, then we can start the process of grieving and healing. Okay. The next one is anger. What does anger look like? Why me? It's not fair. This is just incomprehensible that this has happened. And we see that people will have anger towards ourselves, right? Was there something I could have done differently? Why didn't I stop this? Why didn't I do something differently? Why didn't I say something earlier? Towards the person who died, I told him to look after himself. I told her to go for those checks before. I told her not to drive after 8 p.m. Towards others, and others who don't understand, you go on with their lives and don't understand what I'm going through. And even if you're so inclined towards God, how could you have allowed this to happen? And what we say about anger is it's an emotional outlet without allowing us to become too vulnerable. So what I call, and you can Google it, it's the most wonderful image that you can see. It's called the anger iceberg. And what you see at the top, and if you picture an iceberg, right, you only see the little top sticking out, right? And that is the anger. That's the part that we allow to come out. But what is under, right? What is under the iceberg, which is the majority of the iceberg, is so much of the other emotions, the pain, the hurt, the disappointment, the loss. All of those emotions are underneath there. And the anger is, in a way, protecting us, in a way allowing us to, feel some emotion without being vulnerable. Where it can be a bit tricky again here is that when it stops us, or prevents us from getting the support we need or alienates people. So one of the things that I will often say to people is we need to differentiate between anger, the emotion, and anger, the action, right? We're allowed to feel whatever we need to feel, but we must be careful about, we need support in this time. We're going to get to that a bit later. Support is vital, and we don't want to be alienating people who could be there to support us. I just put the word irritability because that actually comes up quite a lot. And for me, irritability really does fit into this anger. For me, irritability is almost like anger on a lower volume. So if you picture anger on the volume, so you turn the volume a little bit lower, and it's that irritability or that snappiness that you get, a little bit higher anger, a little bit higher rage. So that's all in the same thing. You might notice just, you don't have the patience or tolerance that you used to have. There's just a little bit more of that snappiness and irritability. So again, we tell people not to suppress emotions, not to suppress your anger. It's a natural response. It's part of the healing process. It's part of the grieving process, and to allow yourself to feel that. Okay, so number 3 is bargaining. So bargaining is also a very interesting one, and it's also part of us, feeling such a lack of control. What can I do to control this? I'm so helpless, right? There's nothing I can do to change things. So we almost create a perceived sense of control. And if you've ever heard, this that says, and we look at it even from before the death or before the person's passing, where somebody maybe is faced with a terminal illness and they'll say, oh, maybe if I, become more charitable, or maybe if I make amends in my relationships, maybe then I'll get extra time. If I do this, then this will happen. And after loss, we see this kind of thinking as well, right? We see this kind of thinking in terms of what could I have done differently if only I hadn't, I'd come home 5 minutes earlier. If only I pushed her to see the doctor when I knew she needed the doctor, right? So you can see that guilt is a huge part of this as well. And it gives us a perceived sense of control. There's also some magical thinking here, right? If I do this, maybe my grief will be healed, or maybe the person that I lost will come back to life. There's a bit of magical thinking here, and it really is, in some ways, again, fighting that reality, right? Or giving us a perceived sense of control. And you can see with all of these stages that there's a psychological intelligence to them. There's an intelligence in us wanting some sort of control in a space where we just feel so, so helpless. Okay, so let's go on to the 4th stage. And again, I'm saying stages, and please just keep in the back of your minds that these are really not linear, and they go up and down, ad hoc all the time, and it can feel like a roller coaster, and there's different emotions that come in as well. But we're just going to deep dive a little bit into these ones. Okay, so number 4 is depression, and this is if you kind of see the others as almost the defense mechanisms and the panic. Here we are really dealing with loss. This is the gut-wrenching loss that we are dealing with, that feeling of just being hit in the pit of our stomachs, that feeling, and anybody who's ever felt depressed, depression isn't sadness. Depression is not sadness. It's so much more than that. And the word here that draws my attention is the word emptiness. It's this feeling, it's a vacuum almost. People say it's like feeling like I'm drowning, right? That people withdraw, there's a feeling of being numb or in a fog. Don't want to go out of bed, don't want to be around others. There's just this feeling of wanting to, withdraw into ourselves and away. This last point about suicidal thoughts, I think I just wanted to mention because I think it's very common that people have thought of, why couldn't it have been me? Why am I not the one that was taken? Why do I now have to deal with this and that person was taken? Or just this feeling like I don't want to go on anymore. And I think there's 2 parts of this I just want to stress. And I think the one part is, the experience of suicidal thoughts, of thoughts such as these, to normalize that, to say that is part of depression and that might be a thought that comes up. And importantly, to understand that we always say as professionals, safety first. Safety is the most important thing, and we need to be able to assess, are you safe, right? Is that just a thought because you're depressed, or do we need to intervene and look at giving you support through that? Okay, so very, very important to take these thoughts seriously and to reach out for help when you need it, which we are going to talk a little bit about just now. just to say, in South Africa, just now means doesn't mean just now in this minute. It means just now in a few minutes. South African terminology. Okay, number 5 is acceptance. How do you accept this? You can't accept this, and no one's asking you to accept this, right? We're not saying it's okay that this person died. That's not okay. You never have to say that's okay. What you are saying is that this person I love died, but maybe I'm going to be okay, right? It's feeling the pain and not resisting reality. The word is, it is what it is. It is what it is. I understand that this is the reality. It's a painful reality, but it's a reality. And you find that in this stage, our emotions might begin to stabilize a little bit. It's not saying that we're not going to feel the pain, right? But there might be more of a stabilization of our emotions and an opportunity for adjustment, for readjustment, for growth, for evolving, for moving forward, to be able to move forward with our pain. So again, it's not saying it's okay. It's not saying, well, now I've got to accept it and it's over. Not at all, right? It's saying that I'm not going to resist reality. I understand that this has happened, right? It's painful, and I understand that this has happened. Okay, and those are really the 5 stages. What I'd like to say here is just, I saw this quote that I really wanted to share with you. It says, when you experience loss, people say you'll move through the 5 stages of grief. What they don't tell you is that you'll cycle through them all every day. And often in the group, we talk about a roller coaster, just a roller coaster of emotions. And as we say, it can be every day. For some people, weeks, months, you're cycling through these, and that you don't have to judge yourself with these. And that's what I love about these 5 stages, or these 5, emotional experiences, that we can normalize, that we can understand that these are going to be part of our journey. And the journey of grieving is the same as the journey towards healing. We have to go. Karen and I were talking before we came on, that there's no way around it. You have to go through it. That's the journey of grieving, is your journey towards healing. So I've put in a little bit of a reflection break here. And this is really the sentence I've got here is a well-known sentence. And it says, we can't heal what we don't feel. Okay. And I just wanted to open that up and to see if that gets any responses, or Karen, to see if there's any questions, and just really have a bit of a breather and a reflection and a question break at this point.
Thanks, Lara. Please, if you do have any questions, please post them in the chat, and we will try and get to them, and each and every one of them, if we have time to. I think that what's important to always remember about these 5 stages is that we can go through them in different orders, in the same order. We can go between stages. We can go back into a stage. There isn't a linear approach, as Lara said. So that's something just for us all to keep in mind. I do have a question here from Sarah, who is asking, then when does it end? When will grief end? How long do these stages take?
Well, Sarah, thank you for asking that question. I mean, that is, wow, that's a very deep question, and thank you for being courageous in asking it. And Karen, I'd love your thoughts as well, but one of the things that I know I've heard from David Kessler, who I mentioned before, is he says, well, when is the person going to be dead until? As long as that person is not with you, you are grieving. Your grieving may take on a different look. So it might not always be the absolute raw emotion of the beginning, or that intense pain. But one of the things we know about grief is there's a cycle. That at times you feel, I can do this, and then there might be a trigger that pulls you back, and you don't know when and how that goes. So for me, the answer would be, Sarah, that your grief can go on forever. Your grief will go on forever, but it will take a different form, right? It might take the form of love. It may take a form of love, of connection in other ways, but we don't ever stop grieving the person. I don't know, Karen, what you think of that.
I like the analogy that you used earlier of a roller coaster. I think that there may be gradual improvements, and then there may be setbacks. That's how it goes. That's how emotions are. And as long as the grieving process takes for you could be influenced by lots of different factors around you. So there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think we've got to accept that we have setbacks, we'll have growth, things will change. It depends, depends on many, many factors, a lot of which is the support system that we have. So unfortunately, Sarah, there isn't a set answer. I wish we could say it will take 6 months, it will take 6 years. Unfortunately, it's kind of tailor-made to ourselves, and it has a lot to do with the work that we put into our journey.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Karen. I really like that. Are there any more questions for now?
Not at the moment. I think let's carry on, and then we can see. Please remember just to post your questions, and then we'll get to them every time we take a pause.
Okay, and just something a little bit about the sentence, we can't heal what we don't feel. My group members will know that I'm very big into emotions and feelings. I suppose that's not quite a shock in the line of work I'm in. But one of the things that I think is so important for us is to be able to understand and know what we are feeling, to be able to, one of the things we say is say it, name it, say the emotion that you're feeling. I'm feeling angry, right? It doesn't mean I am angry. It means I'm feeling angry. This is an experience I'm having, right? And we don't have to judge ourselves for that. We can just allow ourselves to be with the anger. What I say is you can say, hello, anger. You can give it a cup of tea and you can move through your day together with him, right? But to acknowledge those feelings and to have a space where you feel comfortable and supported enough to do so without judgment. Okay, so that's really the emotional journey. What I wanted to look at a little bit more now is the physiological journey. Okay. So I think to say because, and you can see with the emotional journey, is that it's so real, it's so raw. There is just, it's a roller coaster. It is a roller coaster all day, every day. And we sometimes tend to neglect our physiological selves, our physical selves. And I always say that we need to be aware of the mind-body connection, and it actually works both ways, right? So firstly, when we are feeling vulnerable, or we are in what I call emotion mind, we are vulnerable, right? We are going through all those emotions. It does have an effect on our physical body. It just does, right? Our immune systems are lower, we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not sleeping well, and it has an effect on our physical body. And the other way around, when we don't take care of our physical body, when we're feeling tired, when we're not nurturing ourselves, when we're not eating right, when we're not exercising, we are far more vulnerable to our more intense emotions, right? You've ever heard the term hangry, right? When you're so hungry that you're angry. So there's really a link between the two, and we need to be aware, and we need to be aware of what's going on in our body. And some of the things to look at, and you'll notice that a lot of these are some of the symptoms that are similar to what we see in depression. It's decreased appetite, right? So I'll often say to a client, what have you eaten today, right? Because I know that if I'd seen you now and I'd eaten what you'd eaten, I would feel terrible. We have to be nurturing our body, right? Tiredness and lethargy, right? Sleeplessness or sleeping a lot. So sleep is huge. It's such a huge topic. I always say we cannot underestimate how much we need sleep for our physical well-being and for our emotional well-being. And sleep is often elusive at this point. It's a very difficult thing. So just to be aware of that. Don't judge yourself, but to be aware of that, right? To perhaps look at things such as sleep hygiene. What helps you, what can help you to relax, to go to sleep, to try to look after yourself and get a good night's sleep to the best of your ability. The gastrointestinal upset, so those sore stomachs and the gastric, is such a classic symptom of our body reacting to our emotional turmoil, right? It's such a classic symptom of that. And one of the things I've said here is to see a doctor, because I think that it's often the last thing people think about. They're so immersed in the emotional sides of things that they start to neglect themselves physically. Actually see a doctor. It might be that you do have a physical ailment that you need to look at, right? also for somebody who's perhaps been taking care of a loved one who's been ill for a long time, they may have been putting off their checks for a long time, their health checks, right? This might be the time to attend to something that you've been putting off for a while. So to be aware that we are physiological beings as well, right? To look after ourselves and to be very aware of that mind-body connection and making sure that we're looking after our body so that we're looking after our mind and vice versa. Okay, and I've got a reflection point here that I'd love to pose to you, Karen, and we can maybe talk about a little bit and then maybe see if we have any more questions. But the question here is, how do or can we care for our bodies?
So I think that that you make a good point, Lara, about especially people who have been the caregivers for their loved ones, having had neglect, in that time they've neglected themselves, and it's sometimes really difficult to think of putting yourself first when you've put yourself second for such a long time. So this is a very, very important thing that we have to really consciously do, because it's not something that comes easily to many people. The other thing is to stress that how we can't underestimate that we can't feel good emotionally if we don't feel good physically. That, you know, we can't underestimate the importance of that. Yeah. I have a question that's come in from Gabby. Thank you, Gabby, saying that it will be a year next month that I lost my mom due to COVID. I have good days and bad days, and I'm so angry at my husband because he had brought the COVID in. And Gabby, that's what she meant. How do I overcome that?
Okay, wow. Okay, so what I'm hearing, Gabby, firstly, thank you so much for reaching out. We really, really do appreciate that. And I mean, that question is, wow, such a difficult, hard thing to navigate. And I would imagine, as you say, the feeling of loss and pain, and then again, that feeling of anger, right? And we spoke about that anger, and this feels like an anger. Your husband, it seems, brought it in, and now you're dealing with this loss. So I think for me, it's again finding a space of support to be able to look at that anger, to be able to express that anger, to be able to feel that anger, to be able to find a safe place to talk about that anger to somebody else, with your husband, to be able to express that and to again separate between the anger, the feeling, and the anger, the action. Right, the anger, the feeling, and the anger, the action, and there's actually a third stage of anger that might be an interesting one for you, Gabby. I always actually speak about 3 stages of anger. The one is anger, the feeling, right? I feel angry, we'll call that anger. There's anger, the action. You know all about my anger because I'm lashing out. We'll call that rage. And there's actually a third one. How long am I going to keep that anger eating me up for? And that we call resentment, right? How long is that anger going to stay with me, right? And that's often the anger that we have to work through. We have to work through that in safe places. We've got to work through that in places that allow us to heal. Karen, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that unfortunately COVID has brought in so many things that we never had to consider before, and it has made a lot of our relationships and definitely our losses a lot more complicated. There's no doubt.
Yeah, and there is, as you say, that word complicated, and we know that we talk about complicated grief when there are these other circumstances that we have to deal with, when the anger issues and if you think about some of the stages we've spoken about in terms of what if, or if we had done that differently, etc. So these are parts of the stage, parts of the grieving, allowing us to feel in a safe place to talk and work through those very, very painful and difficult emotions.
Absolutely. I think let's carry on for now, and then we'll stop again for some more questions.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Karen. And just in terms of how do we or can we care for our bodies? We often talk in our groups about the self-care, and we talk about really basic things such as what we put in our mouths, how we eat, Do we, exercise if we can, even if it's just a short walk around the block? Looking at our sleep, looking at, very basic things such as too much coffee, so really looking at, and sometimes, not sometimes, always, it's those small things that count. Those small little changes can make a huge difference. Okay. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so let's look now at the cognitive journey. Okay, so what happens to our mind? Oh, a lot, yeah. Okay, so people will describe just forgetfulness, just feeling like, that feeling of you walk into a room and you're like, what was I doing here? What was I supposed to do? I knew there was something I had to do, but I don't know what I had to do. Just really inability to concentrate or to think clearly. And if you think about it, from the perspective that here is our mind that has literally gone through this trauma of understanding a loss, right? And we said that it's not a loss outside of ourselves only, it's a loss inside of ourselves as well. Our mind is frantically trying to process this, trying to find a place to put this, right? It's very, very busy doing that. It takes a lot of our mind space. So yeah, it makes sense that it would be difficult for us to concentrate on, the things that we might have to do during the day. Obsessive thinking, right? Going back, playing things through our mind over and over again. Denial comes in here, not going there. Difficulty making decisions, which I'd like to talk about when we look at the reflection, because I think that that's really, really important. That often comes up in my group. How do I make a decision? What decisions do I have to make? What decisions don't I make, right? And feeling like I can't, and this one's telling me to do this, that, we're surrounded by people who know what's best for us. And, really having to try and navigate that. And just this feeling like I'm going crazy. I'm not me. I'm not who I was. How do I get back to who I was again? How do I feel like me again? Okay. And the reflection point here is really about these big decisions. What do we do about big decisions? Do we make them? Do we not make them? What do you think, Karen?
I think that it's always risky to make big decisions in a time where you are emotionally quite vulnerable. I think that's often not the best time to be making big life-changing decisions. But I do think it's a very important time to put yourself first and make decisions regarding your support and the care that you need. Those are the decisions that I feel like we need to focus on in this time, around choosing what I can do to help myself, what I can do to put support structures in that when I feel like I'm not managing and I'm overwhelmed, who's around me that can help.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a few things about decisions that I was thinking about is I think firstly, there's some decisions that are, that you have to make. There's decisions about the burial, there's decisions about maybe living or financial or residence or family. There's, all these decisions that you have to make. But I think big decisions that you don't have to make now, that you can put off for a while, right? One of the things that I suggest is to, especially when our minds are so, there's so much going on in our minds and such an intensity of emotion. Our triage system gets mixed up a bit. And by triage system, I mean, when you're going to the hospital and, the red people are the urgent and the yellow is, after that, and the green, if you come in with your child with a sore throat, you probably will be seen last. So the same thing with us, to look at that in our decision making. Which things do I have to make now? Right? Which things can I put off for a while? Which decisions do I actually not have to make at all? Right? To really put that into a triage system, I think is useful. The other analogy I like to give people is the analogy of being in a car. So if you're in a car and you're driving and there's mist, what are you going to do? So I hope that you're going to slow down. You're going to slow down or maybe go to the side of the road if the mist is that thick until the mist clears. And that's what I say to people. Right now it's misty. It's really, really misty. If you can avoid making those big decisions, slow down with that. Take that in your time. At some point, the mist will clear up and you'll get a bit more clarity and be able to make that decision.
I love that. I like that analogy of the mist. I think that's exactly what when people who are really grieving, a lot of them describe that feeling exactly as that, as it just feels foggy, it feels misty, it feels like they can't think clearly, and that's really an indication of being completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Vicky, which is, I think, a good time to go through this when we're talking about reflections on our physiological being. How do you find a moment of peace just for a short time for your heart to stop hurting?
Oh gosh, well, Vicky, just thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for asking that question. It's not an easy one to answer. That is not an easy one to answer. And one of the things that I've seen that this has to be part of your journey and done in the right time, in the right way, right? And to be able to gift yourself that moment, because sometimes it can feel really guilty to have a moment where you're not, where you have reprieve from that hurt. Sometimes you don't. I had a couple of weeks ago in my group, I'd given them a resilience tool, a resilience tip, where I'd suggested doing one thing that week that was pleasurable for them, that would give them a positive emotion. And this is a research-based resilience technique, to look for something to put into your positive emotion piggy bank. And I could just see that it was such a relief to get a professional saying, you are allowed to do that. You can find one moment in your week, and if that's all that is, where you can put something in your positive emotion bank, right? If it's a tiny moment where you sit and you smell your cup of coffee and you drink it, whatever that tiny moment is, that you can put that into and allow yourself to feel that. But when you're in the midst of that pain and that loss and that emotion, it's why I say it has to be at the right time and in the right way, Vicky. Karen, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
I think that it's important to try and work out for you what is the one thing that you think would work for you, and make an absolute decision to do it. For some people, that one thing maybe is just simply going and getting themselves an ice cream. For another person, it may be finding half an hour in the day to take a walk. So I think that you've got to find what works for you and what resonates for you, and then making a point of doing it.
Yeah, I love that, and I think we'll come to a bit later on when we talk about the road to healing is, the consciousness and the mindfulness, the choice to allow ourselves to do that without guilt. Just that tiny moment, yeah, and that's going to take practice and self-love and self-care. And I'll tell you another thing that I've noticed as well, that sometimes the first step to self-love and self-care is actually boundaries. To say, I'm not going to do that. No, I can't do that today. To be able to put up the boundaries and to allow yourself to care for yourself, to love yourself, to know when to say no and to know when to say yes. But Vicky, just thank you so much.
Okay.
Karen, should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. The spiritual journey. Okay. So often you'll find people questioning previously held religious beliefs, right? Questioning the meaning of life. How could this have happened to me? And I think this is sometimes, we spoke earlier, that if you are religiously inclined or so inclined, there might be an anger element to that. God, how could you have done that to me? How could you have done this? I'm a good person, right? How could you have done that? And really questioning the meaning of life. How can there be, and meaning? I mean, meaning is a topic on its own. It is such a huge topic in terms of this, in terms of loss, in terms of regaining, feeling like we've lost meaning in our life by losing this person that was so dear to us. And how do we regain that meaning? How do we maintain that that connection with that person and regain that meaning? A feeling of loss of faith, right? I used to believe, but now I don't know anymore. Meaninglessness, pointlessness, right? And then actually on the converse, what some people might find as well is actually a strengthening of spiritual connections, which again might be leading into some of that that road towards the healing. But it could go either way. It really could go either way. But there's a lot of feelings of questioning, just questioning why this has happened. Why? How could this happen? how could this happen? How could this have been let to happen? And feeling the sense of, and if we think back to that emptiness, just the sense of void, just a void, a big, big void that leaves us questioning and asking. And I think my reflection question here is, how do we feel about spirituality? How does spirituality, because I think that our relationship with spirituality is often, going to be tied up very much into our experience of spirituality in grief and in the grieving process. Karen, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to reflect on that, or if there's any questions at this stage.
I think it's important that we realize that at some point of our grieving process, we are faced with a question around spirituality, whether it be around the type of burial that the person maybe chose for themselves, or maybe we are left to choose for the person. And a lot of that involves decision making, and maybe our own personal feelings around spirituality most definitely influence that. And it's often a topic or a subject that we don't really, if you're not particularly religious, it's maybe something you haven't really considered or thought about. And it definitely is something that some people struggle with when they're faced with these kind of questions.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, grief triggers these kind of questions. Maybe they're
Absolutely.
questions that we haven't even thought of ourselves before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Karen, are there any questions at the moment?
I think let's move on, and then we'll
maybe
take some
do questions at
afterwards.
the end. Okay, absolutely. Okay, so let's look a little bit now at the pathway to healing. Okay. So, because we've actually called this talk Navigating the First Year After Loss, and one of the topics that we considered was actually surviving the first year after loss. And I think that what's so important here is this word survive, or survivable, right? That this is going to be painful, but this is survivable, right? We always say you don't know how strong you are until you know how strong you are. It's painful and it's survivable. Self-care we've spoken about, and just as the grieving process is going to affect us on all of those levels, right? The emotional, the physical, the cognitive, the spiritual, so too do we need to look at self-care. How do we care for ourselves emotionally, right? How do we allow ourselves spaces to heal emotionally? How do we not judge ourselves for our emotions? How do we surround ourselves with people that are there to support us? How do we reach out for help? How do we reach out for support? The physical we've discussed. How do we nurture our bodies? How do we care for ourselves? Those basic, eating right, all of that we've discussed. How do we look after ourselves cognitively? How do we also, maybe if I understand that I'm forgetful, I don't have to judge myself with that, but I could perhaps write lists, right? I'm a big believer in lists. What practical things can we do to help ourselves without judgment? To understand my mind is busy processing something so deep, right? And I need to just help it along the way. And we spoke a bit about the decision making. How do we care for ourselves spiritually, right? Maybe there are questions that we have. Maybe there is a religious or a spiritual healer or leader that we could go to discuss this. Maybe just being in nature. People describe nature as very, very healing. Planting trees, honoring, things that really nurture the spiritual side of ourselves. I think conserving energy is a big one. We are going through a lot. We are going through a lot in this year. There is a lot happening. It's taking up a lot of energy, and you'll often speak to people and they'll just say, I am exhausted. They'll just say, I am so exhausted. I'm exhausted physically. I'm exhausted emotionally. I'm exhausted spiritually. I'm just so tired. Conserve your energy. Again, thinking about that triage system. Do what you need to do, right? You don't need to do everything. Do what you need to do. Be kind to yourself. Conserve your energy. Time is a big thing, and that's why I love the picture of this one step at a time, right? One step at a time. I think that we can sometimes be harsh on ourselves, and I think that people can be harsh on us as well, right? I always say we're not on our own timeline, right? And we discussed that earlier this evening, Karen, that we've got to allow ourselves the time, whatever that takes, whether it's longer than we thought, whether it's shorter than we thought, whether we have times where we feel better and times where we feel worse, to allow ourselves that, to give ourselves time, The things people say, ... Oh gosh, could we write a book on this? This comes up a lot, and I'm sure, Karen, for you as well in groups, and David Kessler calls it, we live in a grief illiterate society. And people say, how do I say it nicely? People don't always say the smartest things, and it can be very hurtful and very hard for us. Okay, so people will say things like, haven't you started dating yet? Or, it's been a year, or, don't you think it's time to move on? Or, just really, really, really insensitive things. And I think that one of the things we've learned in our group and with clients is really to understand that they don't know, they don't understand. And I think that leads us to how important it is to surround ourselves with people who get it, with people who really, really get it, right? I don't know if it's too much to say to be compassionate to the people who don't get it, right? Because the truth is that grief happens to all of us at some point. We cannot avoid it. The only way to avoid grief is to avoid love. If you love, then you'll grieve, right? It's part of life. It's part of where we'll go in life. So I think to just be aware of the things that people say, try not to take them too much to heart. Try to understand that. And also, and I've put this in bold because for me this is the most important part of this journey, is to accept help and to find support. Really to understand. And that came up so much when I spoke to my group and I said, what do I tell people? And they said, they can't do this alone. You need to surround yourself with help. Right? Surround yourself with support. And I think that Circles is such a beautiful example of that, to be able to find a supportive group of people who have been through this, people who, as I said before, can say, I've been there, I've got you, you've got this, right? And no one can say that to you unless they, every journey is unique, but unless they've gone through a similar tough journey to you. And the last thing is to be true to yourself. One of the things we talk about when we talk about trauma or grief is we talk about post-traumatic growth, right? And one of the things that you notice that when people come out of this, or when people are going through this, you realize what matters and what doesn't matter, right? There's a perspective that you have. They say you climb the mountain of grief, and at the top, what you find is perspective, right? What is important, what's just not so important, right? And to be able to be true to yourself with that, to be able to be honest and true to yourself. This is what's important to me. This actually isn't that important to me anymore. And these are just some of the things that came to mind in terms of the road to healing. I don't know if there's any questions before we go. We should go straight onto this navigating first.
There are some questions, Lara, but I think let's go into the navigating first, because I think the questions are going to cover both.
Oh, we'll be by this. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Okay. So as we said, this first year, there are so many firsts, right? It's the first anniversary, it's the first birthday, it's the first, time you have to go to, a function on your own, or to a wedding on your own, or, you get the invitation and it says 4-1, or, the first holiday season on your own, your first Easter, your first Thanksgiving. There are so many firsts that you have to navigate, and these can feel and be really scary and really daunting and very emotive. And one of the things that I think is helpful to think about, and that I will often tell my group members, is to mindfully plan, right? So to think to yourself, how I know this is coming, right? So we will always know it's coming, because this will be, this impending date. I know this date is coming, right? How do I want to honor this date? How do I want to do it? Do I want to be on my own? Do I want to be with other people? Some people prefer to have that time on their own, and some people want to be with people. Some people need the connection. Is there a way I'm going to honor that person, right? maybe I lost my wife and I always used to buy her flowers on our anniversary. So maybe I will still buy flowers and I'll put it in her room and I'll think of her as I look at the flowers. Is there a way I can honor? I know that some of the things I've seen that people do that is so amazing is go to a restaurant that we used to go to together, or go to the gravesite and have a picnic there, right? There are so many ways to look at that, and to look at, again, do I want to go out, or maybe I want to do this at home, right? Again, there are no rights or wrongs, but I think that there's something helpful in planning, in mindfully planning. And something that came up actually the other day in one of my groups was always the anticipation is worse than the actual day. The day is going to be painful, but that anticipation, we often talk about that in the group, the anticipatory anxiety, right, is often so much worse. The day will bring emotions, it will bring feelings, it will be hard, but the anticipation is often so much worse. So that's something to keep in mind. To understand, and I think we've said this, that you can honor the life of your loved one. There's a way to actually really honor the life of your loved one, and to think about ways and how to do that in storytelling, in speaking, one of the things that we always say is people like to not speak about the person you've lost, like not to remind you that they're gone. And we say, no, speak about the person. I always, in my groups, we always know the name of the person that's lost, and we mention and we speak about that name because they're there in the group with us. And we will say, how is this person doing, etc. And or what would this person say, or what would this person want? And we bring those people, we bring them to life through talking. Handle your memories with care. Understand what you want to do with your memories, where you want them. Do you want them, on the walls? Do you want them in books? How do you want them shared? With who do you want them shared? And again, these firsts are difficult. So plan for special support in them. Think to yourself, who are your safe people? Where are your safe places, right? Plan that you have special support during those times. I don't know if there's anything, Karen, that you would like to add about navigating these firsts.
I think that the most important thing for me is really tailor making it to yourself, that you need to work out. Do I need to be with people? Would I prefer not to be with people? And then you plan accordingly. I think that it's very important. These days can be quite difficult. There are definitely triggers that may bring up a lot of emotions. So I think that first and foremost, you need to think what's good for me. How am I going to handle this day? And then plan according to that more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay, we're really coming to the end of the presentation, so we'll just maybe end off, and then, if there is one or two questions left over. But I really wanted to end off with back to our friend Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I just absolutely love this quote, and I want to share it with all of you. And what she says here is, and maybe this is even an answer to the question that was asked in the beginning, what is the timeline? How long will we grieve for? And she says here, the reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal, and you will rebuild yourself around the loss that you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same, nor would you want to. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, words and way to end off. And just one quick last concept that I heard from actually another therapist who works in this area a lot, and she speaks about the donut and the hole in the donut. And she says, that hole in the donut is always there. But at some point, we begin to notice that there's also pastry, and there might be icing, and there's stuff. The hole is still there, but at some point, we learn to be whole again, not to focus on the HOLE, but on the WHOLE. And that is our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. I found that analogy always so helpful. And it's important for us to realize that we don't have to get over it. We never get over it. I think that the journey of grief allows us to to live with it, to live alongside it, but we act to find those moments where we can feel joy again and we can feel happy again. And it won't mean that we have forgotten in any way, but rather that we can live alongside our grief instead of getting over it. And there have been a few questions really around the same theme. So the most important and the most common kind of questions that we are getting is being around the fact that people around us are telling me to move on. People around us are telling me to get over it, and I don't want to.
Yeah. Oh gosh, we get that a lot, and that's why I say it's the things that people say, and that we live in this grief illiterate society, and people, and people want us to get over it because it'll make them feel better, right? And that's why I say be true to yourself. Try not to let that get to you. Not to feel their judgment or internalize that anyway. Understand that it's coming from their misunderstanding. Right? It's coming from their misunderstanding. You don't have to internalize that. You don't have to own that, right? And to try again, the converse is to surround yourself with people who, can be there for you, for people who really do get it, who people can say, I get it, I've been there, you've got this. Those are the people that we want to surround ourselves with as well.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I want to take a moment to thank you, Lara, for being here with us and for sharing your wisdom. We also want to thank all of you for attending and participating, and I hope that you're leaving today feeling better, having taken the first step to your healing journey. And now that you've taken that first step, to an amazing second step would be to join circles. You'll have a group of people who not only know exactly what you're going through, but who are going to support you every step of the way. And with that being said, we do have a special offer for you using the Support 30 code. I'm going to put it up, should be on your screen now. You will have a 30% discount to Circles for 3 months using this code, and you will receive an email shortly with all the details of how to join, so that you can really learn the tools and gain the support that you will no longer have to navigate this first year alone. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.